Hello, Portia.
Hey, how you doing, Chris?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm very well. I'm very glad to have you on to the 206 Projects podcast. The reason I wanted you on is because I watched a interview conducted a few years ago, and you talked about your life story and what you've been up to, which is just extraordinary. And then I watched some of your TED talk actually a few hours before this interview went out, and which summarised it like perfectly. I just thought, yeah, I just want to have someone like that on, someone who's been through a lot and now who's got a lot of hope behind her and is doing well. Um, but before we continue, for those who don't know who you are, and I know it's very difficult because, or you might have a lot of practice doing this already, it might be very difficult. You can just say who you are and basically your journey up until this point.
Yeah. So my name is Portia Louder, and I live in the United States in Utah. Um, to summarize my life, I would say it's been pretty difficult, and it's beautiful now. So I'm grateful that I'm on the other side of some of those things. I've spent close to 5 years in federal prison, and also been through some other hard things. I placed a child for adoption and was a young single mother. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for where my life is today.
Very cool. So let's start like all stories at the beginning. From what I remember from researching this, you were in a family of seventh sibling, is that correct?
Yes, I'm the oldest of seven children
Yeah.
and grew up in a kind of small town area in the country. And my parents were pretty non-traditional. My mom was like a very creative, more of a hippie type of a person.
Mhm.
And my dad was a Vietnam vet and he had a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of fun as a kid, but there was no structure, no rules, no boundaries. And I think I started to struggle quite a bit when I went into the teenage years. And so, and my first struggle was boys, a lot of older boys that I was dating, and then some substance use, alcohol use when I was in my teenage years. And then ultimately, when I was 17 years old, I got pregnant with my first child. So.
Okay. From what I researched, was it a while before you actually left the village that you were brought up in, and therefore you didn't know the world outside that village? Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I was in a very small area, and so I just couldn't really see life outside of that. I didn't have any plans. I thought I would just be a mom. And that's not just be a mom, but I didn't think I'd go to college or I didn't have any plans. And um, not long after I got pregnant with my son, my parents moved to a city. And so that was really strange for me to go visit a city for the first time. And that's when I decided I wanted to get out of the village, the small town, and I ended up moving to the city with my parents. But when I got to the city, I found out I was pregnant again. So at 21, I had my second child as a single mother.
Just describe for me what it was like when you actually went into a city, because imagine with a village, especially back then, it would have been very small, very compact. The buildings weren't that big,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then you go to a city and it's complete opposite. Had you even seen photos of a city before you even moved to a city?
Not really. I didn't, I remember the first time I was driving and I saw the city and I was like, for me, it just felt like energy, like bigger and more exciting. I recently was in New York with my daughters, and it was the same feeling. Like there's just so much more here than where I was. I wasn't scared. I was excited. It was like exciting for me to see that there was a lot of world I hadn't seen. There was more than what I had experienced.
With that excitement, was there naivety in terms of being streetwise as to the ways of how cities are and how people interact in cities as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I got a job and right away, um, a man twice my age asked me out. He was 42 and I was 21. And so, I mean, I went out with him. Like I didn't know it was like I was a little kid, like brand new and exciting and pretty unsafe for me, really, not knowing anything. But I somehow survived all that. So, yeah.
So you had a child while you were in the village, and then when you moved into the city, you had your second child.
Right.
How, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but soon after you had your second child, did you move out of your parents then after that, soon after?
No, I moved out at 17 and I moved into like a government housing. But then I moved with my parents when they moved to the city. After I had my second child, I started dating again and I got pregnant again. And at that point, I chose to place my son for adoption because I mean, I was 23 and pregnant with my third child. I didn't get any child support. Their fathers weren't in their life, and it was really scary. And I felt like my kids deserved better. And so I found a family and I placed my son for adoption, but it was a lot harder than I thought. Like I didn't know what to expect with any of that. I didn't have a counselor or anything. And when I tried to go back to work after, wasn't I wasn't doing well. And I ended up using drugs and becoming addicted to drugs after I had my son. So
Before the drugs, did you get married? Actually,
I
no.
was married once. Yeah, it's kind of hard to count it, but I was married. Um, And when I moved to the city, my husband, basically, we got married. I hardly even knew him. He was 10 years older than me, and he was my second daughter's father. And when I moved to the city, he just said, I'm not leaving this town. This is where I want to stay, this little village, you know? And so I moved, got divorced, and then I found out I was pregnant, and he didn't want to be a part of my life at that point. So um, I had two children from two different fathers. And then when I got pregnant the third time, that was another father, and I just chose adoption at that point. So, and at that point, that's my life. I just had already been through so many hard things at that age that I just hit the street. Like that's when I really hit the street and started using drugs, lost my job, and my parents were pretty much taking care of my children at that point.
Was there anyone, because you say about your parents taking care of your kids, was there anyone at that age saying, don't do this, there's another way to this is what you need to learn? Was there anyone you met in the city that if actually could teach you like a right path, or did you just
Oh,
know?
no, I'm so stubborn. Like, there's no one that could ever get through to me until I want to make a change. Like, I remember my dad trying to reason with me and trying to help me. And finally, my dad just said, you'll just have to die if that's what you're going to do. Like, he couldn't, because I was going to do what I was going to do. It's always been that way for me. I'm really stubborn. And so, I had to just hit a total bottom. Like, the people I was running the streets with, they were drug dealers. They were not people that were trying to help me. And my parents let me stay there, but I would leave a lot. I would just come and go as I pleased, and I was not willing to listen to anybody. So,
So how did the drug taking start? Was it just the people you were hanging around with and asked you to try this, or was it a bit more complicated than that?
well, I started out with just prescription drugs. Like, so I got addicted to pain pills, not really understanding that I was addicted to them. And then my uh, my a cousin came to our house to visit, and he was using street drugs. He was using methamphetamine, and I tried it and I was hooked like the first time I used it. And then got me kind of into it, and then I just kept finding people. Like when you're using drugs, you just find your people, and I just kind of hit the street and started using with other people.
How did you fund that drug habit?
Oh, stealing, lying, cheating, sugar daddies, like, yeah, all those things. Like it, the lifestyle is just not good. Like there wasn't anything good going on.
I can imagine. I mean, to have all that at a young age is a
Yeah.
hell of a lot. I mean, your mind must have been racing 100 times a minute. I mean, if you're having methamphetamine, I mean, I've never taken any
Yeah.
recreational, but I imagine from what I've heard, that's something that keeps you up at night and erases you. Mentally, it must have been a massive toll on you as well.
Yeah, it was awful. I remember I would have panic attacks, and my dad would try to talk to me, and I saw some really dark things, you know, because I was on the street. Like I remember going into this drug house and this young boy that was dealing drugs was also pimping out his mother. Like she was a prostitute and he, you know, there was just ugliness going on everywhere. And um, I remember coming home a lot and just being so sad, like thinking I was going to die. Like I couldn't remember anything good anymore. Like it just felt so heavy and I was anxious. I knew what I was doing was wrong. And the thing that was the very worst was looking at my children because I had two children besides the son I placed for adoption that were my parents were taking care of. And it still makes me sick, you know, that I remember my daughter just saying, Mom, are you crazy? And my son wanted me to be around. He wanted to spend time with me. And I didn't even want to see them because I was so bad. And my parents were taking care of him and they were so scared. Everyone was just scared. It was just a really dark time for sure. Yeah.
It sounds it, and I mean, especially from when you describe, I'm smiling out of nervousness because when you describe just then that boy you saw and he was pimping out his mother,
Right.
that must, was there a point? I mean, if I saw that, that shock me. But I'm just wondering, you've been through so much at that young age anyway. Was there
Yeah.
a point where it almost became normal that this was normality to you and you're just living it?
Yes and no. Like it became normal, but there was always that sickening feeling of this is not for me. Because my parents lived in a nice neighborhood and they weren't drug users and they weren't criminals. So it was like, I knew better, you know, I knew better. And it was hard for me to live. I was very divided in my soul. Like I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but then I felt like I was in such a deep hole that I couldn't get out. I was really addicted. Like I kept trying to quit and I would promise myself I would quit, but I would go back to it over and over. And I've shared this in my TED Talk, but I finally reached this point where I came home late one night and my son had been crying for hours for me. And my mom was standing there with him and she just looked at me and said, this little boy, all he wants is you, Portia. And if you can't change your life for him, you should just go and let us take care of your kids. If that's not enough for you, nothing ever would be. And I remember walking downstairs with my son and just laying on the floor and sobbing and begging God. I was like, I can't live like this anymore. Please take this from me. And my son came over and he goes, Mom, it's okay, Mom. Don't be sad. It's okay. And I said, Jace, I'm so ugly. Like, how could I do this? And he said, No, Mom, you're so beautiful. And he pulls me into the bathroom and he goes, See, Mom, look how beautiful you are. And that was the night my heart broke. And I knew I'll go to any length to get sober. And the next day I called the drug dealer and said, Don't ever come back. Don't ever call me again. And I got a counselor and I started down the path of recovery. And it was very hard. Like I felt very broken, but I was determined. I think my stubbornness is a weakness, but it can be a strength when I decide to do something different. And so I was very determined and I went down the path of recovery.
Did your stubbornness stop you from relapsing, or did that happen during your recovery period?
No, I did not relapse. And I think that I was so scared of using one more time. Like I knew that if I used one more time, I would be back at the street. Like I knew how bad my addiction was. I craved it. I dreamed about drugs. I missed it. I wanted to use drugs, but I didn't. And I just did it one day at a time. I went to a lot of support group meetings and I got a job and I just started back and I just did it. And it was really hard, but I didn't relapse.
You said, I'm just wondering, when you went to those meetings, NI meetings, you say there was a nervousness there. Were you shocked by the type of people that were there? Because I've never been to any of them, but I know people that have. And they always say, well, it's not who you expect. It's like the white collar office, people middle class, anyone from there to someone who's poor. Did that wide range demographic shock you in terms of the people who are addicts, or would you just know?
No, I felt like I was home. When I walked into my first meeting, it was like, I felt like I wasn't so alone because my parents lived in a white, like a very affluent kind of a white collar type area. And so for me to walk into a meeting, it felt good for me to see people from all walks of life that I didn't feel like where my parents lived, I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone about my addiction there. So it was like I lived in this nice area, but I had been on the streets. And so for me to go to a meeting, it was like, oh, good. Here's some people that have been on the streets, but they're not anymore. So it was like an immediate connection for me to say, they've been through what I've been through, but they're okay now. That means I can be okay too. It was just safe. I felt good when I walked into my first meeting.
So is that group your friendship group as well, where you all decided, well, we'll all just look after each other, and you obviously have sponsors in AI and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. Like that first year especially, I listened to what people said and I that became my social support. Um, but after a year, like I was working and I ended up meeting my husband, which at that point I was pretty sure that I wasn't very good at picking partners. So I wasn't looking to get married or anything, but my husband is a great guy and he hasn't been like he's not a criminal. Didn't have any of the past that I did. No children, hadn't been married, and I think I scared him to death. But I think he really liked. I said, "Why would you even date me?" And he said, "You're so interesting. You're interesting." So we got a home and I was really busy trying to be a mother. Like I hadn't been a mother. So I had two kids in elementary school and then I started my own company. And so I was very busy.
Okay. You alluded to this earlier, where you said you didn't really know what you wanted to do when you were at school, and the drugs
Mhm.
were almost filling a hole as well. By this
Right.
age, did you still know what you wanted to do in order to fill that hole, or were you just satisfied with just motherhood at that point?
No, you know, everyone in my family is photographers. I didn't go to college. I dropped out of high school when I got pregnant and then I ended up getting my GED. But I mean, it was in my blood to be a photographer. Like that was just what I grew up seeing and being around. And so I'm good at it. Like it's a natural thing for me. So I had worked for family members taking pictures to start my own company. I think a lot of people think, oh, that's really neat. I'm like, it was just a job. Like I didn't know it was a good job for me. I mean, I was paid well to do it, but it was what I watched. Like if you grew up on a farm, you'd become a farmer. I grew up around photographers, so I knew a lot about photography. So I just started my own company doing that.
Okay, so what did you take photos of first, just the environment around you, or was there anything specific where you thought, actually, I want to take this, say, nature, for example?
No, I was a wedding photographer, which is stressful, but it's what I got paid the most money to do. So, and I went from like 30 weddings a year to 200 weddings a year. I was a really busy wedding photographer. I had employees and it just grew, 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 grew. And that was part of the problem for me after I got married. I had two more children, 18 months apart, so they were close in age, and my company was just booming and about the time real estate here in the United States went crazy, I ended up having a back surgery and I relapsed with prescription drugs
Mm.
and I got involved in real estate. So it was like a perfect storm for me. I was way busy as a photographer. I had nannies taking care of my children. I didn't want to be that busy and I thought I'll just make more money as my parents were kind of always involved in real estate things. And so I just got involved in that and ended up getting involved in illegal real estate deals. So,
Oh gosh, yeah. It's just quickly before we talk on the real estate, and obviously that leads on to prison and whatnot. But when you say the wedding photographer was stressful, other than the amount of number of bookings you had, in what way was it stressful? Was it more the couples not satisfied at all with the photos? Or
no, no, it's just an intense thing, right? Like if it rains and it's an outdoor wedding, or if the let's say that you're on the way to the wedding and the traffic goes bad, like it's their most important day. When I first started taking pictures, I was using film. So if there was a problem with the camera, you didn't even know it until you'd send the film to the lab and then they'd send it back and say, "Oh, your camera back leaked light through all of it. So that means the whole wedding's ruined." I mean, it's terrible because it's their wedding day.
mm,
Or when I went digital, the card was compromised. Like I'm taking pictures and I go download it and it won't download. Those are like so stressful. And if you have multiple weddings in one day, there's a lot more that can go wrong. You're trying to get to one event and then this camera goes bad and your backup goes bad. Like there's so many things that can go wrong and it's just such a important day for them. So it's stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So let's talk about real estate. So when did you start getting involved in real estate? What time frame are we talking?
It was 2004 that I first started getting involved, and then 2005, I got a lot more involved. So 2004, 2005, 2006, I was buying and flipping lots and houses, and then the market crashed in 2008. The FBI started investigating me in like 2007, maybe. And so maybe even the end of 2006. I heard I was under federal investigation. I really didn't think what I did was illegal. Like I figured everyone was doing it, you know, it just seemed like it was kind of this great big thing going on. And so in my mind, I'm like, I am not going to prison. Like there's no way. At first, I just made a lot of excuses. I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. Go after the banks. The banks are fully aware of this. But it just got worse and worse and worse. Like the more that I fought it, like the skills that I had used to get through my life to like power through and fight, they don't work with the federal government. Those skills don't work. I was like up against a brick wall, and the more I fought, the worse things got. So.
For those who don't know, and I think I know the concept of this, but I'm not so sure. Can you just briefly explain what flipping actually is?
Yeah. So when I was buying lots, I would just put a lot under contract, give them some money, and then I would find a buyer and sell it for more. That's kind of how I would do it. But when I got involved in these house flips, it was like lock up a house, get a high appraisal, and pull cash out of it from the bank, and then invest that in something else. So it's kind of like a real estate Ponzi scheme. You just keep buying this one, pull the cash, buy that one, pull the cash, and then buy the next one. And I just had a bunch of them. So
So how many houses did you actually acquire through this?
yeah, like at least 60.
Oh my gosh.
And they're all $1 million houses, so it's not
Oh,
good.
that's probably
Yeah,
why the feds were keeping an eye on you at that time, yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
gosh. And that was in 3 years you don't manage to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they told me they'd never seen anybody in one 6-month period of time. They said they'd never seen that many transactions closed by one person. So I'm pretty aggressive. It's a problem. Not anymore. Well, yeah, not like it was. So yeah.
Is that, and maybe I'm just going off, it sounds weird, but obviously you're addicted to drugs. Was this almost
Right.
an addiction to you? Okay, let me see how many houses I can do this way.
Oh, see, I'm addicted to drugs, but I'm also addicted to hustling. Like I like to hustle. And what I found out is in prison, everyone in prison likes to hustle. Like
Mhm.
they're more addicted to the hustle than they are the drugs. Because yeah, I didn't realize that, but especially if I use drugs, then I get this grandiose thing where I think that I'm like super powerful and I just go hard, 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 harder, you know? So that was a huge problem for me.
Cool. So just going back a little bit in the story, obviously the feds are keeping an eye on you and they interview. What was that day like when they actually first showed up at your doorstep and said, "Oh, we want to question you about your flipping activities"?
Yeah, it was really bad. Um, because they came to the house and I had my youngest child. She was only 3 months old. So you don't want the FBI showing up and you're thinking they're going to send you to prison with it when you have a baby. And then they looked at my husband and they told him, you're going to have to decide if you're going to work with her or if you're going to stand by her or work with us. Because if you stand by her, we'll indict you on a conspiracy with her. And they basically said, she's going to prison. That's happening. And I was like, I just, it was awful. It was so awful. And I told Chad, don't talk to them. I was like, don't say anything to them. And they got madder and madder at me. Oh goodness, it was bad. Yeah.
It's been crazy. So obviously they've taken away in handcuffs away from.
No, that's not how it goes.
No, you don't. Okay.
No, and it's kind of unusual in the United States. It depends on your case. Um, with me, they just continued to investigate. They didn't indict me, which is the charge me for several years. So they came and met with me, then they went to title companies and they went to my neighbors. It's like, you're under investigation. It's very harassing, like that you know that it's happening. And then I hired an attorney and we fought it and tried to talk them out of it, but eventually they did charge me, but they didn't come and arrest me. I went to the federal courthouse building in Salt Lake and they fingerprinted me because I wasn't a danger to society. It was a white collar charge. So I didn't have to go, I didn't get incarcerated at that point. I was just on pretrial release. So literally, I didn't even go to prison until 2015.
Oh gosh,
Like,
I didn't
yeah,
realize.
yeah, it was years and years. It's funny because people will say, "Why don't you just go on with your life?" And I'm like, "This was 20 years of my life." Like from 2005, I just got off probation in December 2024. Like, it's close to 20 years of my life that this took. The investigation, the indictment, all this time it's hanging over my head. I'm using drugs. It was terrible. Prison was bad, but all the lead up to prison was terrible too. And probation wasn't that bad because I don't care, but I mean, it was bad. I'm finally free of the whole thing just recently. So, yeah.
Good, good to know. What was court like? Just going in the court and
Yeah, it was devastating. I mean, because I feel like when you walk into a courthouse, that's when it gets real. Like, all I had been doing is fighting up to that point. And so the day that I walked into the federal courthouse was when I knew how serious my situation was and that they were going to give me the maximum sentence, which was 7 years. Like, prior to that, I thought maybe I'd get probation or a year. But the day that I walked in, it was like, whoa, I could tell, this is serious. And it's crazy because they say the United States of America versus Portia Louder. And that's a lot. Like, you feel
yeah,
like the whole United States is against me. It feels really heavy. It's kind of shocking actually, and pretty devastating to experience that.
yeah. I mean, thankfully, touch wood, never happened to me. But
Yeah.
I, that's just it. Just I don't know how I would feel if that was me because then it must be a lack of control. Because in many ways, I don't know if it's true, but the flipping in a way you were good at, so there was some control there. The
Yeah.
drugs, unless I'm wrong, there was some control there. So
Right.
even though there was addiction, and obviously addictions can take hold and whatnot. So with prison, I imagine that loss of control, where you're sentenced and you have to be out of bed at a certain time, in bed at a certain time, eat dinner at a certain time, do this at a certain time. That must have been devastating for you.
It was devastating for me to leave my family. It was there's like this, it's like all of a sudden you feel like you're an enemy of the state. Like, you feel like I am now on the other side of the fence. Like, I have just been condemned. But if you really understand control, like, all my life I have been trying to exert external control. Internal control is much more powerful. Like, my time in prison really gave me the opportunity to figure out how to use my thoughts and my response to what was happening to me. And so it got to the point where I didn't care. I felt very free in prison, but initially it was devastating to go to prison. Like, it took me a few years to start to really, like, go deep inside myself and make the best use of that time.
Yeah. So did that involve things like going to the library and educating yourself, or
A
doing like
lot of that.
I don't know. Did you do any courses while you were in prison as well?
I didn't really think much of their courses. Like, I thought, well, what do I want to learn from the federal government, We had a library and I read that library out. I read like 12, 15 hours a day. So I read a lot, I meditated a lot, and I taught classes. Like, I wrote curriculum and taught. I taught a photography course, and then I taught like a goals course, and I taught how to write your mission statement. And I found a lot of meaning in that. In some ways, I look back at my prison time as like the best time. It was like the most painful, but I don't have the kind of time I had then. For me to be sitting outside and meditating and deep breathing and walking and reading, that's freedom. Like, I don't have that kind of time out here. I'm very busy now. And so when I go to prisons and I talk to people, I'm like, enjoy the time you have because you won't have it when you leave, But you don't want the time. It's so weird because you're in prison and all you want is less time. Like you don't want 5 years, you want 1 year. And then you get out here and all you need is more time. And so I don't know. My prison experience taught me how completely unimportant material things are. Like those things aren't what matter. It's the experiences, it's who we are on the inside that matters. Our mind, what we do with our mind and with like real freedom is internal freedom, not external freedom. When they say, that I lost my freedom. No, I lost my liberty. That's different. Freedom comes from within me. I feel very free. I can be put in a prison cell and feel completely free. But my liberty was taken from me for sure. And I was without that. But it gave me a chance to focus in on my own internal freedom. So,
So would you say prison made you, just to lead on to that point, made you more mentally strong?
oh, yeah, for sure. When I look back, I think, um, how weak I was before I went to prison. Like in many ways, I had given my power away. It was really painful, and it took a lot of effort on my part and a lot of just soul searching and um, internal struggle, recognition of my weaknesses, and understanding the seriousness of the choices I'd made and how I had given away my integrity. Um, so I fought hard because I did not want to come out of prison after 5 years with nothing to show for it. And I could see that, before I went to prison, financial accomplishments and worldly accomplishments were a big deal to me. Like I felt like I had failed as a young person and I was trying to prove myself in my 20s and 30s. And then prison comes and it's like an epic failure. And that's when I realized now I got to go deeper. Like what is real accomplishment is who you are on the inside, that internal freedom. And so I put a lot of effort into rebuilding my character and getting to a place where I felt really good about myself internally.
So you did that work in prison. How would you describe your character before you went to prison? And then what did you specifically start to work on?
Yeah. Well, I was very weak before I went to prison. In many ways, I feel like and I was insensitive. Like I didn't really think about others. I was selfish. Even though I was a mother, I was like powering my way through these real estate deals, my drug use. Um, and I think that I was weak with my character with integrity. Like I wasn't, even as a photographer, I looked at numerous times where I would say I would do this and then I would change it, or I would like my word what didn't have the kind of value that it does now. Um, I would get into things easily. Like I was a hustler before I went to prison. I was always making a deal with somebody about something. I didn't keep my word to my kids. Like the kids were involved in activities and I'd say I'd show up and I wouldn't, and I'd always have a good excuse. I was late for everything I did, which I would never do now. Like that's offensive to me. You know? So when I started taking a look at that, I made a spreadsheet and really put down all these things on a spreadsheet, and I could see that I had these weaknesses. So I decided, what do I want to be? How do I want to, I'm going to start at ground zero. So I wrote out a map of what I wanted to be, like what values are important to me, like keeping my word, being on time, um, a good mother. Like, what does that look like? My kids trust me. I just started to rebuild and kind of clearing out the old character traits and building new ones. And people will ask me like, well, what do you do when you get home from prison? And I said, oh man, like people that are in prison, and I'll say, don't wait till you get home, man. Start now. Like keep your word in there. Show up on time in there. Like do everything that you want to do out here in there because you'll build these habits. And I didn't care about material things in prison. So when I got home, I knew I wasn't going to focus on money. I wore the same clothes for 3 years when I got home from prison. Like I did. I just barely started changing my outfit. It was the same exact color, the same everything. I didn't want to get stuck in material things when I got home. And I was just focused on my integrity and character, keeping my word. And with my children, I've earned their trust back. And with the people I work with, I'm highly respected. I respect myself. And so that's been the difference for me.
It takes a lot to do that. I mean, I've not been to prison, but I have done that where you look at yourself because of certain
Yeah.
events and you think, gosh. How was there any resistance to it initially where you might have come to a place where you thought, oh, I don't want to touch that, and then you left it a few days and thought, actually, I need to do this?
It was terrible. Like my first year, I was in complete denial. All I did is think about how rotten the government was and try to focus on how good of a person I was, which is not the way forward. It was interesting. I remember being in prison. I had been there for close to 2 years, and I was sitting at a table with this woman who was very smart. She had been um, a politician. She was an older woman and had had a lot of success. And she was sitting there completely stuck in denial. Like she kept talking about how bad the government was. And then I had another friend who had been an attorney, and I had a friend who had been a doctor, really smart people. And all we would do is sit and talk about how smart we were and how dumb the government was. And I thought, we're the ones that are in prison. Like, why are we, it just, and I remember getting up off that table and going outside and sitting under a tree and praying about it and saying, help me see myself to where, help me make changes. Like I don't want to get stuck here. I don't want to be stuck. Like it's so easy to focus on the affairs of the world and how bad it is instead of looking at ourselves and what we can do internally. The resistance that I felt was intense. I spent hours when I really got honest with myself. It was so emotionally devastating for me. Like I cried and cried because I had done all this to myself and I'd hurt the people I loved. And until I could admit that, I couldn't start to build something new. And a lot of it was that my children were struggling, and I didn't want my kids to feel like they were a victim to the system. So I had to own it and say, it was me, you guys. I did this to you, not the government, not the judge, not the lawyer. Blame me. That's very painful to do when you're in prison, but it was also powerful. It's like a lot of times I think we avoid things because they're painful when they could really bring about good results. But I was determined. And so I carried on. I continued that process of you know, looking at myself, and it wasn't easy, but it was so worth it. I'm so grateful I did it.
So, in summary, would you say it was cathartic?
Oh yeah, I wrote an 18-page thing about myself and got really honest with myself. And I started reaching out to people I had hurt. I even reached out to my ex-husband and asked him to forgive me for my part. Like everything I could think of to reach out and ask for forgiveness and take ownership of my mistakes. I did that. It was very cathartic.
Yeah. One thing you said there, they said that before you went to prison, you were very selfish. Uh,
Mhm.
Although obviously, like I said, you became a mother and you had children and whatnot and your business. Where do you think that selfishness came from?
Well, I think being the oldest child, kind of like my parents catered to me, I guess. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. My parents were very hard workers, but I kind of was privileged in a way, and I just thought it was all about me. And even as a mother, like I don't know how to explain it. It's a weird kind of selfishness. It's the kind of selfishness where I was always worried about myself, like what people thought of me and my comfort level. And I think it was a combination of selfishness and lack of integrity that led me to prison. I mean, a drug addiction is very selfish. It's not like I mean, once you're in it, you're too weak to get out of it. But making those choices up front was very selfish of me. So,
Would you just summarising what you said there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would you say there was a lack of self-worth in that respect before you went into prison?
absolutely. And self-worth comes not from what people think, but what you think of yourself, right? And so that's where the character building came in. I had to restore my integrity and character if I was going to feel good about myself. And and that took time. So,
So the day you left prison, what was that like? Was there someone waiting for you at the gate? Like, what was that first day like going back into society?
well, it was really special because when I walked out of the prison, all the women came running out and cheering for me. And I loved them so much because I had put a lot of time into knowing them, getting to know them and caring about them. And my husband was waiting for me with flowers, which was so amazing, how exciting it was to just hold his hand. And we have such a good marriage because we've been through so much together. But I think it was overwhelming. Like I remember driving and people were calling my husband's cell phone and he was like, "Do you want to talk to him?" And I said, "No." I mean, I was not used to having that. Technology was overwhelming. Going into a gas station was overwhelming. Everything had been so simple for so long. And I felt really lonely. Like I was so used to no technology and genuine connections in prison. And out here, it's not like that. It takes a lot more effort to connect. Like when you're living really close to people, you get to know them. You talk about everything. There's things about prison I miss. That's one of them, getting to know people. So,
That's interesting because I've spoken to people on this podcast and other episodes and outside of this podcast about human connection, and how we don't. Because I'm the type of person, I'll go into a cafe, I'll see someone reading a book, I say a nice book, and just start a conversation like that way. But
yeah.
especially in the UK, it's probably less so in the States, but especially in the UK, even before technology took over, some people would look at you and say, "Oh, what are you talking about?" so to speak. And I just wonder, with when you left prison, was it say it's 2015?
Yeah. No, I went in 2015. I came out in 2019.
2019, okay. So the time you spent,
COVID.
yeah,
COVID happened.
well, COVID partly as well, but also in those 4 years, the number of people communicating through social media, through Zoom, in work, they have like Zoom meetings, they have in-person meetings, that increased quite a lot. So I imagine
Yeah.
that was a hell of a shock to you to see that
Yeah.
change.
It was very intimidating. Initially, even going back to work as a photographer was intimidating because I had been away from technology. So I went to work in drug treatment where I could be around people. Like before prison, I was all about image, and I got home and it wasn't like that at all. It was different. I wanted to focus on that internal stuff. Now I work through Zoom and I've gotten better at the whole technology thing. I do a lot with social media, but it was pretty overwhelming and intimidating. And what I've learned about that is this: there's not just one way to do it. It's okay. Like you don't have to be the best at anything. Learn and be willing to do what you can, but it's it's okay. Like I've I do it the way I do it. For example, I do social media, I do TikTok videos, and mine are just simple videos. And I see all kinds of fancy stuff, and I'm like, that's okay, you do that, I'll do this. Like we don't all have to be the same, you know? So
Yeah. Although, I mean, I would say one thing with social media is yes, you can get the positive feedback and the constructive feedback, but then I imagine you just have to ignore the trolls who just troll you for the sake of trolling you.
yeah, it was good for me. Initially, I was managing a large Facebook group during COVID, like 500,000 members, and I would get negative comments. And sometimes it hit hard, but I'd have to look at it and say, maybe they're right. Maybe I need to take a look at that. Mostly all the nice people will totally rip on the trolls and tell them to go away. Like I don't really have to moderate that too much, but now and then, yeah, it sucks to hear that, but you just decide like, if I put it out there, then I got to be willing to take the good and the bad. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you say you work in drug treatment since you come out of prison. Are you still doing that? And what other things have you done that the old you wouldn't have done before
Yeah,
prison?
my life's completely different. I work in drug treatment. I work with youth that have been abandoned in many cases. I go into prisons, but I also speak at corporate events. So I try to connect both sides of the fence, so to speak. Because of my real estate background and my white collar background, I can connect with the upper class. But because I've been to prison and I'm an addict, I can connect with people who are on the street. I work with the homeless in where I live, and my life is completely different than it was before. And I didn't know that it would be like this, but I love what I do. I'm a lot happier than I was before I went to prison. So
Oh, cool. Just quickly going back to prisoners, what was your view of prisoners before you actually went into prison?
I thought they were all bad.
Yeah, obviously, but yeah, it's do you think, oh gosh, they're all thugs, did you
Yeah,
treat them
yeah.
at the same level, from I don't know, white collar crime to someone a drug dealing, did you just treat them all the same in that respect?
I just didn't think about it. I just thought if you go to prison, you're a bad person. And
Yeah.
then when I went to prison, I was there. I went, well, now I got to challenge that whole thing. Like, because I'm here, I can't be, I have to see it different. And I'm so grateful that I do see it the way I see it now because I understand it. I didn't understand it. And it seems to me that more people want to understand it and they're willing to listen. I also wrote 2 books. So those I've had a lot of, those are available in prisons in the United States. I need to get them available in the UK. Gotta figure that out. I'm glad
Probably
I
go on
thought.
Amazon. That's what I do. Put them on
Yeah,
Amazon.
they're on Amazon and Audible, but they're also available in the US on prison tablets across the country, but I want to make it available in the UK too. So I'll have to look into that. But for free, because I want them to have that story, right? So yeah, I think that it's just been a totally different world for me. Who knew I would write a book, you know? That's
Cool.
crazy. It's
Well, this I
cool.
was going to ask you because I'm a writer myself, and I was going to say, was a book based on your experiences and how's it been received?
Yeah, it's been received really well. The first book is called Living Louder, and it was about um, kind of what led up to prison and then my whole prison journey. And I ended it when I got home. And then the second book is more my younger years, like with my family. And then the middle of it is me coming home and the people I've met since. And then at the end, it kind of comes back in. It's a little different, and it wraps up to with my family, my immediate family. Um, we lost my brother a year and a half ago to suicide, and so that was what drove me to write that book. Is just I felt so, for me, both my books were written from a really deep place inside my soul. It was like when I got home from prison, my heart was so full, I just had to write it. And then when my brother died, my heart was so full, I had to write it. And so I hope nothing else happens, but whenever that happens to me, I just have to write. Like I wrote the one book in about 4 months and the other one in 3 weeks. Like that's just, it was like I couldn't even breathe. All I could do is write. So yeah.
Obviously, you've done many of these interviews talking about your life, but like I said earlier in the interview, a few hours ago, you did a TED talk. What was
Yeah.
that like? Because I know I have a friend of mine who actually did a TED talk. It must have
Yeah.
been really nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I don't want to do that again. I was surprised. I don't want to do that again. They asked me to do it, and it's weird because um, I am so used to connecting with my audience. Like when I speak, I don't get nervous when I speak, but they make that all shiny with lights and fancy, and it felt I was nervous. I didn't really like that part of it, being nervous, but it's all right. I didn't even write it or prepare it at all. I just showed up and did it. That's how I do all of the speaking things I do. And so normally, as long as I'm calm, I can connect really well with my audience. But I didn't feel like in the TED Talk, they have these lights so you can't even see your audience. So that was hard, but I'm grateful. It gives more people a chance to hear my story. It's available in prisons too, my TED Talk. So there's that.
So what does the future hold for you now? What would you like to do in the next, say, 5, 10 years?
Well, my brother-in-law owns a radio station. I'll probably start a podcast this year with him on that. I am a percentage owner of a company that helps people come out of prison and get into treatment. And I also work for a company that does coaching all across the United States. I'm way too busy. My goal is to slow down some. I'll sell more books, maybe write another book, and just continue working with the people I work with that I love. So, yeah.
Just finally, if people want to find out more about you, where can they go to?
They can go to my website, portialouder.com, or they can Google me. I'm the only Portia Louder. So it's a unique enough name. You could Google me and all my social media platforms will pop up. And yeah, and I'm pretty good at returning messages. If somebody reaches out to me, I mean, my email too is portialouder@gmail.com. I'm pretty available if somebody has a question or needs to reach out. So
Cool. I'll leave the links to both your web site and also your TED Talk in the description below.
okay.
Portia, it's been an absolute pleasure for you. We've had quite a few people on recently who
Yeah.
said, "Oh, I went through this, went through prison, and so on, and come out the other side." And it's always nice that they come out the other side. They can teach us their experience, and we can learn something from it. So, thank you so much for coming into the 286 project. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me today.